ये रिकॉर्डिंग थोड़े टाइम के बाद चालू करें. Yes, welcome members. Today we are having investor awareness program where we have Vishal Chandiramani and Abhinay Gupta with us. It is a joint seminar of WIRC hosted by BCSC, Borivali Central City Study Circle. I request all present here to raise for a motto, institute motto.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामंशो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शितः सर्वे तदूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
I would request Shreyans to play the jingles as per WIRC.
Thank you, ICAI, for Tax and Finance Literacy Drive. Finally, funders of Tax and Finance are clear to me.
Lots of housewives, employees, doctors, students, entrepreneurs, farmers, and people from other categories are learning the fundas, saving, budgeting, investing, and spending after participating in ICAI's Tax and Finance Drive. You too participate and become self-reliant by learning about finance and tax guidance from expert chartered accountants. Vittiya Gyan, ICAI's initiative. Visit ICAI.org.
થેન્ક યુ આઈસીએઆઈ ટેક્સ અને ફિનાન્સ લિટરસી ડ્રાઈવ માટે. ફાઇનલી મને ટેક્સ અને ફિનાન્સના ફંડા ક્લિયર થઈ રહ્યા છે.
કેટલીય હાઉસવાઇવ્સ, એમ્પ્લોઈઝ, ડોક્ટર્સ, સ્ટુડન્ટ્સ, ઓન્ટરપ્રેન્યોર્સ, ફાર્મર્સ તથા અન્ય શ્રેણીના લોકો આઈસીએઆઈના ફાઇનાન્શિયલ એન્ડ ટેક્સ લિટરસી ડ્રાઈવનો હિસ્સો બનીને સેવિંગ, બજેટિંગ, ઇન્વેસ્ટિંગ અને સ્પેન્ડિંગના ફંડા શીખી રહ્યા છે. તમે પણ હિસ્સો બનો અને એક્સપર્ટ ચાર્ટર્ડ એકાઉન્ટન્ટ્સ પાસેથી ફાઇનાન્સ અને ટેક્સ ગાઈડન્સ શીખીને આત્મનિર્ભર બનો. વિત્તીય જ્ઞાન, આઈસીએઆઈનું અભિયાન. વિઝિટ ICAI.org.
थैंक यू ICAI फॉर टैक्स एंड फाइनेंस लिटरेसी ड्राइव. फाइनली मुझे टैक्स और फाइनेंस के फंडे क्लियर हो रहे हैं.
ढेरों हाउसवाइव्स, एम्प्लॉइज, डॉक्टर्स, स्टूडेंट्स, एंटरप्रेन्योर्स, फार्मर्स और अन्य श्रेणी के लोग ICAI के फाइनेंशियल एंड टैक्स लिटरेसी ड्राइव का हिस्सा बनकर सेविंग्स, बजटिंग, इन्वेस्टिंग और स्पेंडिंग के फंडे सीख रहे हैं. आप भी हिस्सा बनिए और एक्सपर्ट चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट से फाइनेंस और टैक्स गाइडेंस सीखकर आत्मनिर्भर बनिए. वित्तीय ज्ञान, ICAI का अभियान. विजिट ICAI.org.
धन्यवाद ICAI टॅक्स आणि फायनान्स लिटरसी ड्राईव्ह साठी. फायनली माझे टॅक्स आणि फायनान्सचे फंडे क्लिअर होत आहेत.
असंख्य गृहिणी, एम्प्लॉईज, डॉक्टर्स, स्टुडंट्स, उद्योजक, शेतकरी आणि अन्य श्रेणीचे लोक ICAIच्या फायनान्शियल आणि टॅक्स लिटरसी ड्राईव्हचा भाग बनून सेव्हिंग, बजेटिंग, गुंतवणूक आणि खर्चाचे फंडे शिकत आहेत. आपणही एक भाग बना आणि एक्सपर्ट चार्टर्ड अकाउंटंट्स कडून फायनान्स आणि कर मार्गदर्शनाद्वारे प्लॅनिंग शिकून आत्मनिर्भर बना. वित्तीय ज्ञान, ICAIचं अभियान. Visit ICAI.org.
Yes, welcome members. Today we have Vishal Chandiramaji and Abhinay Gupta, who will speak on mutual fund awareness, research and mutual fund research and development. I would request Lalit Bhai to give our past convener to formally introduce both the speakers.
Thank you, Ashish Bhai. It's a pleasure to introduce both the learned speakers. Starting with Vishal sir. Vishal Chandiramani is a CFA, CFP, is the head of products and chief operating officer at Trust Plutus. Vishal has over 15 years of experience in financial services and consulting. Vishal has handled assignments in sales, investment advisory, and portfolio management, and has also worked as a research analyst. Vishal is an MBA from SP Jain Center of Management, Dubai and Singapore. Vishal is also a chartered financial analyst from the CFA Institute, USA, and a certified financial planner from FPSB, India. With this brief introduction, may I request Shreyans to present e-memento to Vishal sir, please. Sir, please accept this.
Thank you so much, Sharad bhai.
Yeah, and now about our second speaker of the session, Abhinay Gupta. He is a senior product manager at Trust Plutus. He is associated with Trust Plutus for the 4.5 years, and prior to this, he has worked with companies like ICICI Securities, Artha Yantra, and Manik Financial in various investment advisory and research associated positions. He has done his MBA from Nagpur University and is a CFP. Welcome, Abhinay sir, and request Shreyans to present e-memento. Please accept.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lalit bhai, for the introduction.
Yeah, thanks. May I request now both the learned speakers to start their session?
Sure. Allow me to share my screen. I hope it's visible.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'll be, start with, the content of the presentation would be basically to have a, brief description and, introduce the, the panelists and members to kind of have a small introduction on the mutual fund. The presentation would be extremely, in the simple language. This is the most simplistic way through which we can really, jot down the important concept and understanding of the mutual fund. I've so to start with, basically mutual funds are the perfect solution, for those people, for those small investors who either don't have the resources, who don't have the knowledge, who don't possess the required information to do research or get into stocks. So for them, it's the most easiest, convenient way to get into and participate in the in the capital market, especially equity, who still forms an extremely important and crucial part of overall growth of an economy. Just to set the context, how broad or how big the market of the mutual fund is. In fact, in November 2021, we have crossed around 38 lakh crore of AUM. As on 30th November. Now that seems to be a very huge amount for a country like India, but trust me, when you compare it with other emerging or developed countries, the penetration of mutual fund in the market is as low as 12-13%. While in some of the developing countries, in some of the emerging countries, the penetration is high as 60-65%. Brazil, for example, has a penetration of 65%. So basically, the overall AUM. Yeah. So in fact, the overall AUM of the Brazil is almost 60-65% of their total GDP. So that seems in a way tells us how low penetrated our mutual fund industry is. We still haven't been able to reach out to the retail investors, NAV investors, and assist them in helping in participation of the capital markets. So that was the context that basically tells us how enormous opportunities we have got in this field. So I'll walk you through the, just give me a second. Yeah. So this slide basically tells you how exactly the mutual fund is formed and what is its structure is like. Before that, I would just like to give you a small introduction on what exactly is the mutual fund. So basically, mutual fund is a trust that collects money from the retail investors, and that money is again handed to a professional fund managers whose job is day in and out to shortlist the stocks, shortlist the bonds, and invest those investors' money into this, the selected stocks and bonds. Simply put, a mutual fund is a financial intermediary setup with an objective to professionally manage the money pooled from the investor at large. By pulling money together in a mutual fund, investors can enjoy economies of scale. I mean, you can invest from as low as rupees 500 rupees a month. You don't have to have lakhs and crores of rupees to get into this. And there's variety of options that you have got as per the investor's risk appetite. So coming back to the structure of the mutual fund, it's a trust, like I said, that pools the savings of number of investors who share a common goal. Money collected is invested by professional fund manager in different types of securities. So the structure of the mutual fund is basically known as 3-tier structure, where there's a sponsor, there's a trustee, and there's an asset management company. The starting of the mutual fund, the starting of this entire structure is done by the sponsor, who basically sets up the trust and then appoints a asset management company, and then asset management companies hire whatever resources is required to manage that money professionally. Now, mutual fund investments gives returns, market returns, and on all the asset classes. In the long term, market returns have the potential to perform better than assured returns. So India is normally identified and known to have a good share of surplus money in the traditional investments such as fixed deposits, RD, savings bank account, and so on. We have been really not able to gauge the potential of the capital market that has got, and mutual fund has in fact provided a very good platform for all the investors. Now, and the most important part or the most important benefit of the mutual fund investment is it's extremely cost efficient. Like I said, anyone who can invest as low as 500 rupees can get into, and there are certain charges that is charged by the asset management companies. It is as low as 0.10% when invested in certain category of the mutual fund. Yeah, so this slide basically talks about the structure. It gives a brief introduction to the various entities who are involved in the overall structure. So first is the sponsor. Like I said, he first conceptualizes the idea of starting a mutual fund business. Before they can act further, they must approach SEBI for the approval and the registration of the process. So SEBI has laid down certain credentials that need to be followed, and that needs to be qualified before approaching them for the registration. Then the sponsor appoints a trustee who basically are the owner of the units that this mutual fund will create. So that this trust must have a board of trustee. The minimum strength of the board must be 4 members. There's also a clause which says 2/3 members should be independent directors, shouldn't be associated with any of the entities, either sponsor or the trustees. So a board of independent directors are those who have no relationship with sponsor in any way. The idea of formation of the trust is to protect the interest of the unit holders and their invested money. So it's very important. So it's a very important and integral part of the entire structure. And then finally, the asset management company is appointed, which basically collects money, invests into capital market, bond market, and give you the returns. The AMC should also register with the government of India accordingly. After the AMC is registered, it will start functioning as a full-fledged company. The AMCs can be either of the 3. It can be a private limited firm. It can be a wholly owned subsidiary of already a public limited company or a JV. So recently we have seen, I think a decade ago, we have seen a lot of foreign companies coming up and doing a JC business with the JV business with Indian companies and running a mutual fund company. So that was about the structure. The next slide basically summarizes what the the product segments that this particular industry or investment option offers. There are n number of schemes, and sometimes it can be extremely overwhelming for the investors to understand as how to invest, where to invest, and what kind of mutual funds are right for them. So the idea of this slide is to dumb down the complexity of that particular concept of choosing a mutual fund. So based on the the kind of investor, so we have segregated the schemes into 3 categories based on the nature. The mutual fund can be either open-ended, it can be either closed-ended or interval. Now the name speaks for itself. Open-ended mutual fund is something where the investors can come in and out at any point in time. The investors come in and out at any point in time. There is no lock-in period here. It's open throughout the year. It accepts continuous, it continuously accepts the investments, and simultaneously it's also open for the sale. Transactions are NAV based, and unit capital is not fixed. Similarly, there are close-ended mutual fund schemes. I think a decade ago there were certain equity. So basically, it has so it's available on both the asset classes. A decade ago there were certain schemes which were into equity and offered a close-ended scheme. So in a close-ended schemes, you get into scheme, the schemes ends its subscription, and then you get the maturity only when the tenure of that or the period of that particular scheme is over. There is no liquidity at all. You cannot exit out of this particular mutual fund schemes if you need money, at any point in time. You'll have to wait till the scheme closes, till the scheme is done with its period. And then there are certain schemes which are part of your interval funds. Interval funds, as the name speaks for itself, it opens for a certain time period and then closes, and then and opens after that. So it becomes a open-ended schemes after a specific interval. Now, based on an investment objective, so it is important for you to align all your investments to a particular goal. You cannot invest, you cannot get into equity market if your financial goal is, or if your financial goal or risk appetite is, let's say 6 months or 7 months or 8 months down the line, because equity markets are so volatile. The returns are not assured, and there are high chances that by the time you are near to your goal, the equity market might be at a stage of a good correction. So on the basis of investment objective, these schemes are categorized in 3 categories. One is equity mutual fund, debt mutual fund, and hybrid mutual fund. So equity mutual funds are purely, they invest into stocks. Under equity mutual funds also there are certain categories which we'll get on later on the later slides. In a nutshell, the aim of the equity mutual fund is to provide growth and capital appreciation over long term. It goes without saying that obviously this is the most riskiest asset classes when compared with other 2 or 3, and maybe a volatile investment. The second category of the mutual fund is debt mutual fund. It invests in short and long term debt instruments. By debt instrument, I mean bonds. It can also get into fixed deposits. They can also invest into commercial papers, certificate of deposits, and so on. They can get into investments which basically offers a fixed coupon or fixed returns from the issuer. And then there's a third category, which is basically hybrid mutual funds. Now it invests into a combination of equity and it invests into a combination of equity and debt securities. Proportion of equity and debt may vary because there's a regulation which says that if the hybrid mutual fund which has invested 60% or more than that into equity, that can be categorized under equity mutual fund for taxation purpose. Now it aims to provide for both income and capital appreciation, again depending on their risk appetite and financial goals of the investor. They can always choose this particular mutual funds if they are very much uncertain about either of the asset classes. On the basis of investment style, so this is more from a fund manager's side, whether they are active fund manager or a passive fund manager. But let me just give a broader definition of what exactly is the passive fund manager and active fund manager management, and what is the difference. So passive fund manager basically replicates your market index. I'm sure you must are aware of Nifty 50. Now, when I say index fund, passive fund or an index fund, what I'll do is I'll just replicate the stocks that are under that are part of Nifty 50, and balance it as and when there's a change in the market cap of those stocks. So I don't have to take any active calls. I don't have to take any. Sorry for that. So the fund manager doesn't take any active calls. They don't have to spend hours and hours on researching companies, on drilling down the fundamentals, then speaking to the CFOs and so on. They can just replicate the stocks that are part of an index. Not necessarily Nifty 50. There are a number of indexes that are offered by the Nifty, Sensex, and so on, and they can just replicate. So we have got index fund which are passive fund, which replicate Nifty 50, which replicate Nifty 50 250 TRI, which also reflects Sensex. So then there are also passive fund which replicate certain sectors, which has the index, such as healthcare, automobile, IT, and so on. Because there is no extra resources involved in the index fund, the expenses are extremely lower. So by expenses, what I mean is basically when you invest into mutual fund, let's say 100 rupees, not the entire amount is invested. The amount is invested, let's say 98.90 rupees. So that 10 paisa is basically charged by the AMCs for their expenses, brokerage related expenses, and so on, right? The more the active the fund manager is, the more the expensive that fund is. So that somehow directly that reflects basically in your return. So if let's say if you have to 10% on 100 rupees is greater than 10% on your 99.90 rupees. But in index fund, that amount can be as low as 2 paisa, 3 paisa, 5 paisa, and so on. And I think we have been seeing this, why this is becoming a favorite instrument for Indian investors. This is extremely famous in more of a developed countries such as US and UK, where the investors, they prefer index schemes or passive funds over active funds. And the reason why we might want to get into index or passive fund is because one, the cost is lower, and second, there are certain regulations that has been laid by SEBI where they have changed the benchmark. Now, because this change in benchmark, the fund managers are finding extremely difficult to provide that extra returns over and above the indexes. So that's the reason why index funds are now becoming a favorite instrument for other investors. Then now coming to the second part, which is active fund, it basically invests in securities and sectors that may offer a better returns. So not necessarily. So they can invest into stocks which isn't part of any of the index. They are actively managed. The churning ratio might be high. It may perform better or worse than the index or the underlying fund, and it obviously incur a very higher cost when you compare to the passive funds. Now, both returns and volatility of the active funds are higher when you compare it with the passive funds, because you take bets on companies which are not part of the index fund, and their performance might not be in line with what the fund manager thinks or has plans for. So this is where the expertise of the fund manager comes in active fund. The expertise of the asset management comes in, the kind of human resources they have with them for the research purpose and identifying such companies which can provide you consistent return, keeping the deviations as low as possible. And now coming to the categorization of the mutual fund. So I mean, let's talk about basically the equity segment. There are more than 10 categories defined as per the investment objective of the investors. So we have got all the categories of the all the categories of the mutual fund, and this is I mean the investors can choose as per their risk appetite. I'll just call out the names. Multi-cap, which basically invest into large cap, mid cap, and small cap in an equivalent amount. So minimum, and so SEBI has in fact come up with a lot of regulations around the the category of mutual funds and in the market cap that these particular schemes can get into, because in a decade ago there were a lot of nuisance. Again, there's a lot of nuisance around the name of the schemes, what was the investment objective of the scheme, and the kind of invest it was getting into. I mean, a large cap fund getting into 50%, 40% into mid cap and small cap was taking a higher risk for that category. So for a multi-cap, as the name suggests, the fund manager can invest has to invest minimum 25% in each of the category, which basically forms up to 75% of the schemes into equity, and the rest it can allocate towards cash or debt or any other market cap that they might find suitable. The second category is basically the large. Now, out of all these categories of the mutual fund in equity segment, large cap is the most conservative one in equity, which basically gets into 80% of the large cap companies in India. Often these large cap companies are also part of the biggest indices. For example, large cap companies do invest in the companies like HDFC, Reliance, which are part of your Nifty 50 index. So they have to invest at least 80% of their assets into large cap category, large cap stocks. Coming with large and mid cap, the minimum allocation required in the large and mid cap is 35%, and the rest they can allocate as per their whatever their outlook is on the market. Now multi-cap, earlier there was no restrictions, but then when SEBI came up with the restrictions on the market allocations that they can do, there was a lot of there was a lot of discussion around as if they can find such opportunities, because the companies who has allocated 50%, 60% into the large cap or mid cap or small cap, they have to reduce it to 25%, and then they have to relocate the entire AUM to the other categories, to the other market cap stocks. So they have recently introduced this flexi cap, and there's no restrictions as such in which specific category market cap they can get into, but at least the entire the 65% has to be into the equity. They can invest across large cap, mid cap, small cap without any restrictions. So we'll see 5 or 6 schemes from different AMCs in the same category but different allocation. Fund A might be invested 80% into large cap, whereas fund B might be invested 30, 35% or 25% into mid cap or small cap or large cap, right? Getting into fifth segment, which is mid cap. Mid cap has to have investment of at least 85% into the into the companies which are mid cap, and then small cap again they'll have to invest at least 65% of their entire assets into the small cap companies, and the balance they can relocate as and when they find suitable. Now there are certain categories which are basically based on the style and the outlook of the fund manager. So dividend yield fund, there's no, they can they can invest across all the categories of the stocks. They can get into large, small, or mid cap without any restrictions laid by the SEBI. But those stocks has to have a high dividend yield. So schemes should predominantly invest into dividend yielding stocks. Now there are value fund and there is contra fund. Now value fund is something where where the investment strategy is basically value investing, where they found the stock is so the market has not really considered the pricing of that particular company, and there's a lot of potential in terms of valuation when compared with fundamentals. So they can get into such kind of companies. And there's this contra fund where it follows a contra investment strategy. So not necessarily that particular strategy is appreciated by what the market participants are expecting. Now it is important to note down that AMC can have only one fund from only one category. They can either have a value fund or a contra fund. They can have both the schemes. Coming to the third category, it is focus fund. The number of stocks should be limited to 30 in this particular category scheme in this category. The others that we have discussed in my previous topics about multi-cap, large cap, there were no as such restrictions where the number of stocks were limited. I mean, they can have as high as 120, 150, 200 stocks. There's no limitation on it, but focus fund, they need to have a 30 very high conviction ideas, very high conviction stocks which they think will perform in future and provide a better returns to the investors. Now there are sectorial or thematic funds which basically focuses and invest purely into particular sector or particular theme. By sector, I mean the IT, the fund manager get into pharmaceuticals, the fund manager get into real estate companies and so on. And they should have been invested, and they should be invested at least 80% of their total assets. And there's ELSS schemes. There's no asset restrictions in terms of categorization or any thematic allocation in the ELSS, but they need to have been invested at least 80% of their assets. So this was all about equity segment of the mutual fund. Now moving, similarly we have debt funds. Now debt funds is basically evaluated on the basis of two factors. The one is the duration, that is how long. So basically debt funds, they generally invest into bonds and commercial papers. Now bonds have a definite time, maturity time, and they have a predetermined coupon rate at which they will pay out the interest to the mutual fund houses. So it's extremely important to understand what is the duration of the underlying bonds in a mutual fund, and what kind of credit quality it holds. By credit quality, I mean the quality of the issuers. Now every issuer, before coming with the bond and getting listed, has to have a credit rating. It's important for them, and that credit rating basically ranges from your AA, AAA to BBB minus, D, E, and so on. There are more than 12, 13, I think 13 or 14 mutual fund categories in the debt segment, starting with overnight. Now the Macaulay duration is one, that is they can get into debt instruments, which basically gets mature into one day. These are basically overnight funds, between banks and corporates, and that can be categorized under cash. So while making this slide, we have categorized the allocation, the bucketing of the credit rating into 5 allocation. So which basically the full form is sovereign. By sovereign, I mean which is 100% backed by the government of India or the central government. Then we have AAA or A1 plus. AAA rating is given to the bonds for for the maturity more than 1 year, and AA is for shorter tenure papers. Then we have AA plus and below, cash and others. So sovereign, cash, AAA or A1 plus is basically the most safest and the most conservative option. The issuers who have rated either AAA or cash are safer when compared to others, and AA plus and below. So as and when you go ahead with the rating, the issuer, the credit rating falls. So in liquid funds, the mutual fund manager can invest only in the papers which basically matures in in 91 days or before that. So maximum duration risk that they can take up to is 91 days. And you can see the average allocation of all the mutual funds that's available in Indian market is so 34% of them is allocated towards sovereign, and 50% is towards A1 plus and so on. Then there's ultra short duration fund, which basically invest into 3 to 6 months. Okay, before that, I just wanted to highlight, and it's worth noting the point that in equity scheme, just like in equity scheme, that is important to understand your risk appetite and investment objective. The same factors has to be taken care while investing into debt fund. I mean, you can't invest into, let's say, medium duration or medium to long duration, which basically has 7 years, 5 years duration for an investment objective or for an investment goal, which is 3 years, 4 years. Because although the debt funds are relatively safe, they are not 100% risk. They do carry certain elements of risk, such as credit risk, then there are duration risk, and so on. Then coming to our fourth categories, we have low duration funds, which gets into bonds which matures between 6 to 12 months. I'm sorry, 6 to 12 months. And normally such kind of bonds invest into sovereigns and sovereign and triple A rated bond, cumulative more than 50-55% of allocation in such kind of categories. Then we have got medium duration, which has a duration of 3 to 4 years, and the credit bucketing again. So every category, that category in the mutual funds wants to be on safer side, but because of this, they are not able to. I mean, they may not be able to provide returns, because the safer the option is, the lower the risk is, and the lower the return is. And so the longest category that we have is long duration funds, which basically are mandated to invest into bonds which are maturing 7 years or more than that. And since there's always an element of duration risk, to avoid any kind of credit risk, they get into bonds which is basically issued by your government of India or state state governments, and the duration is normally 7 years, 10 years, 12 years, and so on. In debt fund, the longer the duration is, the higher the interest rate risk is, because there's an inverse relationship between your interest rates and the price of the debt mutual fund, or NAV, that is termed in the mutual fund industry. So in debt mutual fund, if the interest rates increases, the NAV will decrease, and so will your returns. So we just wanted to emphasize again, it's important to understand the duration of the debt fund that you're getting into, the kind of strategy the fund manager will follow, and how far you are from your financial goal. Continuing from our previous slide, there are 3 or 4 more debt mutual fund scheme categories that it's important to note down. There are corporate bonds, credit risk, banking, and PSU gilt. So corporate bond basically, I'm sure you must have heard that the bonds are issued by all the entities, can be issued by all the entities, corporates, Government of India, state bank, state governments, banks, PSUs. In corporate bond, the mandate is that the minimum investments of 80% of the entire asset has to be in the bonds which are issued by corporates such as Reliance, then HDFC, and so on. Then there's credit risk fund, which basically invests 65% of total assets in the bonds or on the issuers which are below AAA rated. Right, they can take the credit risk. Now, because they are taking the credit risk, the yields, YTM, or the returns of the credit risk are relatively higher when you compare with the other categories of the debt mutual fund. In the credit risk, the duration risk is relatively low because on an average, I think they don't take more than 2.5 or 3 years of duration risk. So we'll just have to focus on the kind of credit risk that we are taking. The third category is basically banking and PSU fund. The name states itself that at least just like in corporate bond, 80% of the assets has to be invested in corporate. In banking and PSU also, at least 80% of the total investments has to be done in the bonds, which is bonds issued by banks and PSU companies. So PSU companies such as RUC, PFC, NHA, and so on. And then finally, there's Guild Fund, which in Guild Mutual Fund, you have to have invested at least 80% into the bonds issued by central government, or state government. There's no restriction in terms of duration. You can invest as low as get into papers as low as 1 year, which is maturing into in 1 year. And then there's Guild Fund with 10-year constant duration, where the minimum 80% of the investment has to be done into the Government of India bonds issued by Government of India, with which has a maturity of not less than 10 years. And then there are floater funds, which can invest across duration, across any duration, and they have to invest 65% of the total AUM in a total under asset management in the bonds who offer a floater mode of coupon. So just to give you a small brief about what exactly the floater funds are. Unlike in normal bonds, where a fixed coupon is decided at the early stage of the bond issuances, for example 10%, and that particular coupon is paid throughout the bond tenure. In floater funds, your coupon is basically is dependent on an underlying benchmark such as MIBOR. As and when the rates of MIBOR goes up, your interest rates on floater goes up. So this floater fund or this floater bond are useful for those investors, for those investment professionals who think that there might be a chances of increasing interest rates thereon. Moving on to the other category of the third category of the mutual fund, which is named as hybrid, and here we have got 7 categories. So it's conservative, balanced, then aggressive, dynamic asset allocation, multi-asset allocation, arbitrage, and equity savings. So in conservative hybrid, certain allocation has been prescribed by the SEBI on in the regulation, which says that if a mutual fund has to be categorized in conservative hybrid, they need to have at least 25 have to have an allocation between 10 to 25% in equity and 75% to 90% in the debt. So this particular category of mutual fund is important and useful for those investors who are not equity, who are not very much equity savvy, very conservative in nature, very near to their financial goals, but still they want to take a little bit of exposure to the equity. They can always get into these schemes. The other is your balanced hybrid schemes. So the minimum equity requirement is increased in this particular scheme. They can take an exposure up to 40 to 60% into equity and 40 to 60% into debt. Similarly, there's an aggressive hybrid fund where the allocation is slightly tweaked from 65 to 80% into equity and then 20 to 25% into debt. Again, just like in the value and contra fund, here the AMC can have only one scheme in their basket of products. They can either have a balanced hybrid fund or they can have a aggressive hybrid fund. They cannot have both the funds. Dynamic asset allocation or balanced advantage fund is basically there's no restrictions in terms of the minimum investments, the minimum allocations required in either equity or debt. They can, it's up to them. It's their discretion to decide whether to invest into equity or invest into debt. and it is managed dynamically as per the fund manager's view. If the fund manager thinks that there might be some corrections going on, he will increase the allocation in the debt segment of the portfolio. And similarly, if if the manager thinks that the stock market or the equity segment will perform better, the allocation will be increased to the equity. So so basically, the idea of dynamic asset allocation is not to increase or to kind of boost the returns, but it is more of a we would like to think of a risk management style, where you think that okay, this segment of the asset class has performed better, or is just going to fall, then we can always play with the allocations. I'm sure recently, you must have seen a lot of advertisements around this balance advantage. All the AMCs are promoting very aggressively, because they think, because again, the asset allocation, the equity has performed better, and they wanted to increase the equity. They wanted to increase the allocation in the equity segment. Then the last third one is basically multi-asset allocation, which has got a minimum requirement of 10% in each of the asset class. Now, in other segment, they can either choose between derivative, gold or commodities. Now, multi-asset allocation is for those who wanted kind of a diversification into the portfolio. It basically reduces the deviation to some extent, not 100%, but yeah, allocation of or introduction of one more asset class does help in diversification benefit. Then there's arbitrage funds, which basically follows arbitrage strategies. Now there are n number of ways through which you can do this. The fund manager can take hedge positions, the fund manager can get into derivative positions, and so on. Then there's finally equity savings base, which basically plays around all the three categories. So they can take equity allocation up to 65% allocation, 10% into debt, and the other they can get into either derivatives, commodities, golds, and so on. Now there are other four schemes which are categorized in which are categorized in the others category. One is the retirement, and the other one is children fund. So retirement fund basically have a lock-in period of 5 years, of the scheme. We can also consider it as a as a close-end date mutual fund scheme. And this is basically for someone who who wants to include this fund as a part of their retirement planning. And then there's children fund, which basically is useful if you're planning to if you have a financial goal which is related to your kid or or children, and you wanted to accumulate some corpus for them for their education, marriage, etc. Then there's index funds. I've talked a lot about in the active and passive session. So I'll skip it. And finally, we have fund of funds, overseas or domestic. So now this is the most interesting category of the mutual fund. Fund of fund. So you have a mutual fund in so domestic mutual fund is something. You have a mutual fund who basically again invest into other mutual funds. So the idea here is to take the exposure of all the asset classes or the best ones that's available in the market, and then you have this overseas mutual fund which basically it's a mutual fund which basically invests into mutual funds and ETFs which cannot be invested directly by the investors in India. So for example, we have some of the schemes which invest into the mutual funds which are offered to the US in the US market and to the US citizens. Then we have also got mutual funds who invest into China, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, UK, and so on. So through this category of the mutual fund scheme, you can always have an exposure of the international equity or debt market and introduce some diversification to your portfolio, and reduce your correlation with the Indian market. So, that's all from, my end. If I'll just open up the session for the Q&A and be more than happy to take the questions. Hello.
So far, there are no questions from the participants.
Sure, Lalit. So I'll just hand over the session to the Vishal to walk us through how exactly Trust Plutus selects the mutual fund, because there are more than 3,000, 4,000 odd mutual fund schemes that's available in the market, and it's really important to understand each and every category, each and every scheme, and then come up with our own selection that we basically advise to our clients depending on the risk appetite and financial goals. So over to you, Vishal.
Yeah, just a moment. Vishal, before you start, request to all the participants, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A box. So once the Vishal finishes his session of presentation, the speakers can take up the question answer session. Thank you. Vishal.
Thanks, Lalit. Thanks, Abhinay. Good evening, everyone. So, Abhinay covered, about a mutual fund, how is an AMC set up, what are the SEBI regulations around that, also what are the various categories of mutual funds. As you would have seen, there are more than 10 categories of equity mutual funds as are defined by SEBI. Every AMC can have one scheme within each category. Within debt, you've got about 15 to 16 categories, right? And again, under each category, every AMC can have, one scheme. Now, totally, if you think about this, there are about 40 plus AMCs in the country today. So in each category, I can have, at least 40 schemes. Certain categories like thematic funds or sectoral funds in the case of equity, ETFs, there is no restriction on the number of schemes. Okay, so one AMC can have multiple thematic funds or ETFs. So overall, as Abhinay was saying, the number of schemes in the mutual fund industry is, extremely large. What we need to do is, how do you, shortlist the recommended schemes from this entire universe, which we in turn then recommend to our clients. So I will run you through the, the screening process that we use at Trust Plutus. Every firm will have their own, methodology to, screen mutual funds. We have a certain process in place which we use, and we will run through in the next few slides. So basically, if you see, Abhinay, if you can change the slide, please. So if you see broadly for each category,
Shall just give me a second. I think
do you want me to present, Abhinay?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, just stop your screen sharing, please.
Sure.
Is the screen visible?
Yeah, Vishal.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Thanks.
Yes, visible.
Okay. So if you see the mutual fund selection process that we have, so for every category of mutual funds, as Abhinay had mentioned earlier, there's a similar format that we follow. So we look at all the schemes in a particular category. Okay, so if I'm looking at, say, large cap equity, I will take the entire universe of the large cap equity mutual funds that are there in the industry. We calculate the risk adjusted performance for each of these schemes in this category. Okay, so we will come to how we compute the risk adjusted performance and do the ranking. After we have computed the risk adjusted performance, we look at what is the size of the fund and what is the vintage of the fund. So typically, when we are looking at schemes, we prefer schemes which have a certain minimum AUM and which have a certain vintage. By vintage, I mean that the scheme should have a certain track record in place. We normally prefer schemes to have a minimum 3 years track record before we recommend it to clients. The only exception here is if there is a scheme which is a unique idea in the industry. In that case, this criteria will not apply. Okay, let me give you an example. Very recently, SEBI has approved, silver ETFs in our country. So mutual funds earlier were allowed to launch only gold ETFs. In one of the recent meetings, SEBI has allowed silver ETFs to be launched. Now, this is a unique or a new idea for the industry on the whole. So whenever any AMC were to launch a silver ETF in the near future, we will straight away evaluate that and recommend it to clients if we feel that there is a merit of investing in silver. In that case, this vintage criteria of at least 3 years will not apply because the category or that particular theme itself is new for the entire industry. However, said that, if any AMC today is launching, say, a multi-cap mutual fund or a large cap mutual fund or a flexi cap fund, I will not recommend it to my clients because there are enough schemes of the same type in the industry which have a long-term track record. So rather than betting on a new scheme which does not have a track record, I would rather bet on a scheme which has a proven track record. So that is what we mean by vintage. And once we apply the filter of size and vintage, we then come down to a universe of shortlisted schemes in every category, which we consider as our whitelist or the recommended schemes in that particular category. So this is the entire approach which is used for each and every category of mutual funds. Now, what are the ratios that we look at? This is the risk-adjusted performance criteria which I was referring to in the previous slide. Now, a lot of people, when they evaluate mutual funds, what they look at is only at the past performance of a scheme, right? What happens is when you look at the past performance, it is a good indicator, no doubt about that. But what looking at only the past performance does is it eliminates the information about how much risk a mutual fund manager is taking to generate the return. So through experience, what we have learned is that it is extremely important to limit the risk that one is taking, a fund manager is taking while, managing a mutual fund. And it is not only about return generation, because you can have a scheme which gives you a very high return in a bull market. And when the markets fall, it will, fall the most. In that case, what happens is it tends to wipe out your entire gains. And in fact, it will take a long time for you to just recover the losses in those schemes. So when we are evaluating mutual funds, we are more interested in tracking the risk-adjusted performance, which basically is a set of ratios that takes into account the return and the risk which is being taken by a fund manager to generate that return. Okay. Now, in each of these ratios, you will see when we go in further detail that the return portion of the scheme comes in the numerator while calculating the ratio, and the risk portion comes into the denominator. Okay, and then I get a certain value. Now, the value which I get, or the number in the ratio that I get when I divide the return by the risk, okay, is what we call a risk-adjusted return. And that basically is a number which is more important for us because it is showing you what is the level of return that a fund is generating for every unit of risk that they are taking. So I am capturing the return, but I'm also more importantly capturing the risk aspect in the ratio. Okay, so if we look at the some of the ratios that we look at, the first one is the information ratio. Now, the definition basically is that the information ratio is the excess of the returns of a mutual fund portfolio over the benchmark. Okay, and this is divided by the standard deviation of active returns or the tracking error of the portfolio. Basically, we will come to the formula, but what this shows you is information ratio is basically used to gauge the skill of a fund manager as to how effectively he's able to outperform a benchmark, right? And the application of this ratio is the higher the ratio, the better it is. So if there are two schemes, a scheme which has a higher information ratio is better than a scheme which has a lower information ratio. Maximum drawdown is basically the drop from the peak in a certain period to the lowest point in that certain period is basically what is called maximum drawdown. So basically you take a period of time, say 1 year. In the last 1 year, what was the maximum NAV that a mutual fund, gained, and what is the minimum NAV that the fund, reported? The difference between that is what you would call the maximum drawdown. So you choose a certain period and you look at the highest point in that period and the lowest point in the period. Okay, that is what you call the maximum drawdown. Now, in case of maximum drawdown, the lower the drawdown, the better the scheme is. Okay, because it means that the scheme has fallen lesser as compared to the others. Sharpe ratio is one of the most commonly used ratios, which is basically the excess of the return generated by the scheme minus the risk-free rate, which we take as the GSEC, divided by the standard deviation of the scheme. Okay, again, the greater the Sharpe ratio, the better a scheme is. The Sortino ratio and Trainer ratios are actually modifications of the Sharpe ratio, and they are actually more refined in nature. What the Sortino ratio does is that today, when what is the definition of standard deviation? Standard deviation basically is volatility, and volatility can be both on the upside as well as the downside. So if a scheme moves from 100 to 105, then moves to 95, then moves to 110, moves to 90, you will say that that is how you measure the volatility. So volatility or standard deviation captures both upside and downside. Now, what the Sortino ratio does is it says that upside volatility is good, because if a scheme is going from 100 to 105 or 100 to 110, that is good for the investor because it is upside volatility, right? What is not beneficial to the investors is the downside volatility. If a scheme goes from 100 to 95 or to 90 or to 80, that is what you do not want. So when we look at Sharpe ratio looks at the total standard deviation of a scheme, whereas what the Sortino ratio does is it looks at only the downside deviation. So whatever upside volatility is there in a mutual fund, you eliminate those data points and you compute the volatility only for the negative values that a mutual fund is generated. Okay, and that becomes your denominator in the Sortino ratio. So the numerator in the Sortino ratio is the same like the Sharpe ratio, which is the portfolio return less the risk-free rate, but you divide that by the scheme's downside deviation rather than the total standard deviation. So that is the Sortino ratio. Okay, Trainer ratio again is a modification of the Sharpe ratio, where the numerator is the same as the Sharpe ratio, which is return of the scheme less the excess return. Okay, the denominator changes. Rather than using standard deviation, what you use is beta of a portfolio. Beta basically is the sensitivity of the scheme in relation to the market or the benchmark. So basically, if the market goes up by 1%, if the scheme goes up by 0.8%, then you can say the scheme has a beta of 0.8. If the market goes up by 1% and the scheme goes up by 1.5%, you'll say that the beta of the scheme is 1.5. Similar. So what happens is a high beta scheme will tend to be more volatile than a low beta scheme. Okay, in an up market, it will give you a higher return, but in a down market, it will fall more than the benchmark. While a low beta scheme will rise less in an up market, but will also fall less in a down market. Okay, so that evens out the lack of upside when the markets are going up. So what you do is you look at the computation where you divide this by the portfolio return less the risk-free rate by the beta of a scheme, and you get the Trainer ratio. Again, if scheme A has a Trainer ratio which is higher than scheme B, you would prefer scheme A over scheme B. So Sortino and Trainer are actually modifications of Sharpe. What we do is we use a combination of all these ratios in computing the statistical analysis for each mutual fund in each category. Now, just to give you some illustrations, the information ratio, as we had spoken earlier, is basically the portfolio return less the benchmark return divided by the tracking error. Okay, so if I give you an example, if a fund manager has an annualized return of 13% and a tracking error of 8%, okay, with the index generating a return of minus 1.5%. How do we compute the information ratio? It's basically the portfolio return, which is 13%, minus the benchmark return, which in this case is negative 1.5%. So it's 13 minus 1.5% divided by the tracking error, which is 8% in this case. So you get an information ratio of 1.81. Now, if I look at 1.81 in isolation, it doesn't make any sense. Is it a good number? Is it a bad number? I have no idea. But what happens is when I compute the information ratio like this for 40 schemes in a particular category, that is when I can rank which scheme has a higher information ratio and which is better than the other. So any ratio, if you look at it in isolation, is meaningless. What we need to do is you need to see it or compare it to the similar ratio of other schemes and then decide which is superior to the other. Maximum drawdown, as we explained, is the trough value minus the peak value divided by the peak value. So again, if we see an example, an investment portfolio had an initial value of 5 lakh rupees. Okay, this portfolio increases to 7.5 lakh rupees over a period of time, and then it falls to 4 lakh rupees. Then it rebounds to 6 lakh rupees before again dropping to 3.5 lakh rupees, and subsequently it more than doubles to 8 lakh rupees. So if we were to compute the maximum drawdown for this particular scheme, okay, you have the trough value as 3.5 lakh. The peak value was 7.5 lakh before the new peak is formed. Okay, so if I'm looking at from one high to the low, okay, you'll take 7.5 lakh and 3.5 lakh, and you compute 3.5 minus 7.5 divided by the peak value of 7.5, which gives you a drawdown of minus 53%. So you can say that the maximum drawdown for the scheme in this period of time is minus 53%. Coming to the Sharpe ratio, so basically the portfolio returns less the risk-free rate, which is the GSEC rate, divided by the standard deviation. So a fund has generated 12% returns this year. The GSEC is at 7%. Okay, the Sharpe ratio can be computed as 12 minus 7 divided by the standard deviation, which is given as 5%. So 5% by 5%, which is 1. Again, like I mentioned, a number 1 in isolation makes no sense unless you compare it to the similar ratio for other schemes in the category. Sortino ratio, if you see, I had mentioned, is a modification of the Sharpe. So if you see, the numerator is exactly the same, which is portfolio returns less the risk-free rate. Okay, it's similar in both the Sharpe and Sortino. You can see that on the screen. The denominator changes to downside deviation in this case as compared to standard deviation. So if I take the same example as above, where the scheme has generated 12% return, the GSEC is 7%, and the downside volatility is 2%. So what we've done is the total standard deviation was 5%, but the downside deviation is only 2%. So when I compute the Sortino ratio here, you'll see that the value comes to 2.5. Okay. The next modification of Sharpe ratio, as we discussed, was the Trainer ratio. Again, you see that the numerator is the same, which is portfolio return less the risk-free rate, divided by the beta of the portfolio, which is basically the sensitivity of the portfolio to market movement. So if I say a fund has generated 15% returns and the GSEC is at 5%, okay, so the numerator becomes 10%, and assuming that the portfolio has a beta of 1.2 times, okay, so your Trainer ratio comes to 0.83. So this is just to illustrate as to how each of these ratios is computed. Again, we do this for each and every scheme in each category. Obviously, it's not something that we do manually. You have softwares which basically, you can define which ratios you want. What do you want to define as the GSEC rate? What do you want to define as the benchmark of each scheme? You can do those things, and then you can get the analysis from the system. Okay. This is basically a summary of what I was explaining earlier. So if you see information ratio, Fund A has an information ratio of 1.81. Fund B has an information ratio of 2.11. As we said, a higher information ratio is better. So I will rank Fund B over Fund A in this case. If you see max drawdown between Fund A and Fund B, I will rank Fund B better than Fund A because the drawdown is lower. It means that in a down market, okay, the fund has fallen maximum of 42% as compared to Fund A, which has fallen by 53%. The Sharpe ratio, again, if you look at the two numbers, you will prefer a scheme with a higher Sharpe ratio. So you prefer Fund B over Fund A. Similar in the case of Sortino and Trainer, the higher the number, the better it is. So you'll prefer the schemes which have a higher Sortino or a Trainer ratio. Okay. So these are, just to explain the various ratios and how we use them, rather than looking at just the returns generated by a scheme. Now, this is an exercise that we do across different time horizons. Okay, so it's not that I will do it only for one particular time frame. What I do is each of these ratios, let me again give you an example. When I'm talking about equity and equity oriented mutual funds, let us take the example of the category of large cap equity funds. So assume that there are 40 large cap schemes in the market. Okay, what we do is for these 40 schemes, for a 1 year period, I will compute each of these ratios, which I mentioned earlier. Okay, I will again compute all these ratios for a 3-year period, and I will also compute the ratios for a 5-year period. Now, whatever is the average score I get for 1 year, I will get a single number. I will give them a certain ranking. I will get a single number for a 3-year period for each scheme, and I will get a single number for the 5-year period. Then what I do is I give a weightage to each of these numbers. Okay, so I will give the maximum weightage to a 5-year period. Then I will give a lower weightage to 3 years, and I will give the least weightage to 1 year. Why do I do this? Okay, is basically whenever we tell investors to invest in equity funds, you always tell an investor invest with a long-term perspective. Now, when you tell an investor to invest with a long-term perspective, it is only fair that you give maximum weightage to the long-term performance of a scheme rather than getting influenced by the near-term performance of a scheme. Okay, that is the reason why we give maximum weightage to the 5-year performance. Then we give a lower weightage to 3 years and an even lower weightage to 1 year. In fact, for less than 1 year performance of a mutual fund scheme, which is, if I look at say a 1 month, 3 month, 6 month performance, we do not even give it any ranking. Okay, or any weightage. The entire weightage is only for a minimum of 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years. So, many a times, if you are into distribution of mutual funds, you will have, someone from an AMC coming and telling you that, look at my recent performance. We have started performing well in the last 1 month or 3 months, right? So you should start recommending my scheme. What is important to understand is 1 and 3 months is too small a time frame to judge a scheme. If you are telling your clients to invest for the long term in equity, you should be giving maximum weightage to the long term performance of a scheme. The idea that we should remember always is the idea is not to capture the scheme which gives you the highest performance. That is impossible. I cannot keep timing saying that which is the best scheme in 1 year, which is the best scheme in 3 years, and I keep changing, because the scheme itself will change in different periods of time. A scheme which is number 1 today need not be number 1 tomorrow. So you cannot keep redeeming and reinvesting, because you will increase the transaction cost as well as the taxation for a client. What one should be focused on is the consistency of a scheme, right? So you should basically want to reward a mutual fund which is consistent in the long term. And if a scheme is consistent in the long term, it may not give you the highest return, but it will also not give you a very high negative value when the markets fall. So you need to balance risk and return both. And as a result, you want to give highest weightage to a scheme which has done well in the long term and which is consistent, rather than which has given you the highest performance. So what we tell our clients is very clearly that we are not chasing the best performing scheme. What we are chasing is the most consistent scheme in the long term. There is a very big difference between the two. Okay, and consistency is something that we need to target. Once we give these weightages to each of these categories, then we get a combined score for all the schemes in that particular category, and we can choose the schemes which have the highest score basis this weighted average number. After that, we apply the filter of AUM. So in case of equity and equity oriented mutual funds, we will look at schemes which have a minimum AUM of 500 crores. Okay. And after we apply this filter, whichever are our top rated schemes, those become the shortlisted schemes in that particular category. When we look at debt oriented mutual funds, the methodology is exactly the same. All we do is we change the time period. So we look at a 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year time horizon as compared to 1, 3, and 5 years in the case of equity funds. Again, we give the maximum weightage to 3 years. then a lower weightage to 2 years, and the least weightage to 1 year. Rest, everything remains the same in terms of the philosophy, except the time period for which you're computing the ratios. Again, you apply a filter of 500 crores to the category, and basis the, the shortlist that you get, you will pick your top schemes. Liquid funds or, liquid oriented funds like ultra short duration, low duration funds, we basically run the analysis on 1 month, 2 months, and 3 months. Because typically you would tell a client to invest in a liquid, low duration, ultra short term scheme only if the investment horizon is less than a year. The moment the client tells you that, we have an investment horizon of greater than a year, you will typically want to recommend short term debt funds or, medium duration funds or banking PSU debt funds, which then comes into the debt and debt oriented mutual fund categories. So liquid funds, we give a 1, 2, and 3 month time period for which we compute the returns. This is an illustration of how we actually do the analysis, and this is taking the large cap equity category, screenshot that we run. So if you see on the left hand side, I've got all the large cap equity funds, listed. Now for each of these schemes, as I informed you, we have computed different ratios. We've computed an information ratio, a max drawdown, a Sortino ratio, a trainer ratio. This is for a 1 year period, each of these ratios, okay? And I've got a decile ranking for each of these funds. I take the average of these 4 ratio decile rankings and I get the 1 year number as say 2.25 for Axis Blue Chip. I get a number of 3.5 for ICICI Prudential Blue Chip, and so on and so forth. I do the same computation for a 3 year period and get a score over here. I do the same computation for a 5 year period and I get a score. So if I again take a single scheme, my 1 year number for Axis is 2.25. My 3 year number is also 2.25 and my 5 year number is 1.5, right? Now what I do is, now comes the weightages part. I will give the maximum weightage to, the 5 year period. So I will give the maximum weightage to this 1.5. I will give a lower weightage to 2.25 and I will give the least weightage to this 2.25. And when I do the weighted average using these weights, I get a final score for Axis Blue Chip as 1.83. Similarly, I will compute the score for each and every scheme in the category. And then I will sort the, all the schemes in the category basis their score and pick my winners. Okay. After I have done this, I will apply the filter on the fund size, which is your second column, and only schemes which are 500 crores will appear over there. And that the top few schemes over there become my shortlist. Now, this is exactly a replica of a screener that we would create for each and every category of mutual funds, whether it is equity, debt, liquid, any category. We would create this on a periodic basis. We do this once in 6 months and accordingly decide on which are the schemes we want to recommend to our clients. In the case of debt mutual funds, we do one more analysis before we shortlist the schemes. So the earlier ratio analysis helps me to shortlist schemes. So, I don't need, so I get a limited universe of schemes in each category. Once I get a limited universe of schemes, what I do in debt mutual funds is, and what the last 3 to 4 years has taught us, especially after the Island FS episode, you had an issue with DHFL, you had an issue with Yes Bank, you had an issue with ADAG Group, right? And a lot of these papers have, papers were present in various debt mutual funds, bonds, mutual funds were holding bonds of these entities, and they had to basically write down the value and as a result suffer a loss. Okay. The learning out of this is that debt honestly is a lot more complex to track as compared to equity. Okay. The reason for that is the same company can issue debt under various entities. Okay. They can have multiple subsidiary companies. Okay. And they can issue debt from each of the subsidiaries. At times you will not even know, which company does the subsidiary actually belong to when you pick up a mutual fund fact sheet. Okay. And as a result, you will not have any idea as to what level of exposure you have to a particular company. So let me give you an example. If Reliance ADAG Group had 10 subsidiaries, and each of these subsidiaries had issued debt, and now in a particular mutual fund, say a mutual fund has taken exposure to 5 subsidiaries out of 10. When you pick up the fact sheet of the mutual fund, you will see entity 1 X percentage, entity 2 Y percentage, and so on and so forth. Now when you look at it in isolation, you will feel okay, each the exposure to each paper is only so much amount. But what you're missing out is that the total exposure to this particular group, okay, is not so less, because when I add up each of the 5 subsidiaries, the total exposure is much larger than you expected. Okay, and if that group faces an issue, this entire amount of 5 subsidiaries will get will be likely to default. So that is something which we learned through the last few years in debt, and as a result we've developed at our end. Now this is something which we do not get from any any software. This is something which we've developed in-house for debt mutual funds, wherein what we do is basically you take the fact sheet of a debt mutual fund, you will get the first table on the left, which is the actual holding in each of the papers that each of the bonds that the mutual fund is holding. Then what we do is we sum up the holdings for each entity, okay, and we say, okay, for this particular entity, what is your total exposure, okay? And after you've done that, you basically sum up the exposure of all the entities which belong to a certain group, and you see what is your total exposure to that particular group. So that is typically the exercise that we would do in case of debt mutual funds, to get a sense of what is the exposure to each promoter group and whether we are comfortable with that kind of exposure to each group. Okay, so this is one additional step that we do for debt mutual funds. It is a tedious process, and as a result, after we've done the initial screening of the ratios, whatever shortlisted schemes we get, we run this additional check on that, and we then shortlist the debt funds. So this is in a nutshell how we shortlist equity and debt schemes. Once we've done this, okay, this is a one-time, this exercise is something that we do every 6 months, but during the period of 6 months, we continue to monitor and review each of these schemes. So we do engage with fund managers on a regular basis. We have our own due diligence questionnaires. We do fund manager calls. We send a DDQ to each AMC, asking them for details on each of the scheme that we've shortlisted. We also do a look-through analysis for equity schemes, which basically shows us whether they are sticking to the mandate of minimum exposure to, say, large cap, mid cap, small cap. What is the kind of companies they've invested in? What is the PE ratio of the mutual fund portfolio, which is basically the weighted average PE of all the holdings in the portfolio? What is the price to book ratio for the mutual fund? What is the ROE of the fund? What is the ROC of the fund? So we look at all these numbers on a portfolio level. In case of debt mutual funds, we track the portfolio quality or the credit quality on a monthly basis. Fact sheets come out on a monthly basis, so we track this data, the previous screen which I showed you, on a monthly basis. We track the debt cons as well as the company level exposure on a monthly basis. Okay, and we basically obviously track the performance of our schemes versus the category average as well as the benchmark on a regular basis, to see if there are any outliers, or if there is something that if we are missing out on some trend or something. This is something we would track. So shortlisting schemes is one part, but you need to constantly monitor these on an ongoing basis, and then review the entire process, which is the entire ratio calculation, back to square one once in 6 months. So this is in a nutshell how we go about shortlisting mutual funds. On the face of it, mutual funds seem like a very simple category or a basic product, but there is a lot of analysis which one can do on this. You have tools available to help you for it. Like I said, we use softwares, but we also develop some in-house tools for tracking the schemes. The idea is to limit accidents, because the moment you see a drawdown in a debt fund, it takes a lot of time to recover that, if at all it is possible to recover it in the first place. Okay, when the DHFL episode or Island FS episode happened, or even the ADAG episode happened, there were certain mutual funds which had to write off 50 to 100% of the value of the papers they were holding. You would have seen news headlines saying, the NAV of a debt fund actually fell by 15 to 20% in a single day. Now, typically a debt fund gives you a return of, 5 to 6% a year. If they had to write off a paper and drop, and the NAV fell by even 15% in a single day, that means 3 years of return is gone in a debt fund. Okay, so these are, extremely big accidents which have happened in the last few years. The idea is to learn from it and to kind of see how you can avoid these kind of accidents going forward. So that is it on the mutual fund research and analysis part. Happy to take any questions from the audience.
So as you see, there's only one question so far, and it is like, then why there are no disclosure requirement from SEBI to show exposure to group? You just spoke about exposure chart.
Yeah, I think I don't think SEBI has reached that level of sophistication yet, right? To be honest, but I think, see, what they are doing is SEBI has recently, if you've seen the news, they have asked all the AMCs to modify their rating scale. So every scheme has a certain rating scale saying conservative, moderately conservative, moderate, aggressive, very aggressive. Now what SEBI has done is they have told all the AMCs, especially for debt schemes, to recategorize their risk matrix. Okay, and basically they have to classify each scheme from across 2 parameters, saying whether they are conservative, moderately conservative, or aggressive. Now, what they've also done is, if a scheme wants to go from moderately conservative to conservative, which means it's becoming more conservative, that is fine, they can do that. But if a scheme is going from conservative to aggressive, that is, increasing the risk in a scheme, okay, they need to, it's like a change in the fundamental attribute of a scheme. And that's when they need to give a publication for that and give a exit load free period to investors to move out of the scheme if they want to. So SEBI is trying in its own ways to kind of mitigate this problem, but they've not really come out with a way and means of tracking a group level exposure. Like I said, it's extremely complex to do it because in equity it's simple, right? You have only one share of one company. So if I say Reliance Industries Limited, there's only one share of Reliance Industries Limited which is traded on the exchange. Everyone can see the price of that security, and what is the price. But today Reliance Industries can have 100 subsidiaries which are issuing debt. Okay, and you will see the names of various subsidiaries in different mutual fund fact sheets, and you will not even know they belong to Reliance Industries till the time you actually go and look at the rating rationale for that particular paper and see the name. So I don't think they've reached that level of sophistication so far as to ask schemes to disclose that. I think I won't be surprised if it comes over a period of time, but it's not there at present.
So there are no further questions. If participants want to ask any question, then they may raise their hand. I'll request Shreyansh if they at all.
I think Mr. Rajendra has raised his hand.
Shreyansh, can you unmute Mr. Rajendra if he wants to ask the question, or is he raised the hand by mistake? And sometimes it happens when you log in from the mobile.
Okay, I allow him to talk. Yes.
Unmute कर. राजेंद्र जी please unmute.
email ID so he's not attentive.
I don't think he has any questions.
Correct. Yes.
I think he has put a question in Q&A.
Yes.
It's like RBI is asking for exposures for bank by SEBI content. Yashish, you may please mute yourself. Yeah.
I think it's a similar question. We've answered that.
Yes.
I think, see, one thing we have to understand is, you've seen some of these defaults happening in the last 3-4 years. In the past, if I take a period of say 10 years prior to that in the debt mutual fund industry, you did not see so many defaults in probably a period of 10 or 15 years, what you've seen in 3-4 years. So I think honestly, the last 3 years have taught everyone more than the last 20 years have taught people. Okay. I think even the regulator will obviously, take cognizance of that and keep, making the regulations more stringent. What will happen is you can't straight away tighten everything overnight, because that will just lead to more panic amongst investors. They will do it gradually. The idea is, the regulator will do what they have to do over a period of time. We can do what we can at our end to at least try and look into things more closely.
So I think there are no more questions from the participants, but as you were saying at the start of the session, if time permits, you will touch upon rate and some other topic as well.
Yes.
So would you like to take that up?
Sure. We can do that if it's fine with you, Lalit bhai.
Yeah, it's fine with us. Absolutely.
Okay. So I think if there are no more questions on mutual funds, that was the main topic for today. But we just felt that there is a new asset class in the country which you should be aware of. It is extremely interesting. It is an asset class which a lot of institutional investors, FIIs, as well as HNI clients are, recognizing and allocating in their portfolios. So we had requested the forum if we could, make a brief presentation on that, as this is an investor awareness session. This is basically on REITs and InvITs. So what I will do is I'll just quickly share a brief on REITs and InvITs, to the audience. Just allow me a minute to share my screen. Okay, so coming to REITs and InvITs. Now, basically, what are REITs and InvITs? A REIT is basically a real estate investment trust, and an InvIT is an infrastructure investment trust. Okay, the regulations for REITs and InvITs are again laid down by SEBI, and they are more or less similar in terms of the norms that SEBI has laid down for REITs and for InvITs. Basically, a REIT is a portfolio of commercial real estate property, and InvIT is a portfolio of infrastructure assets. Okay, so just remember it very simply. What a REIT is, it's real estate. InvIT is basically infrastructure assets, which could be power transmission lines, it could be gas pipelines, it could be highways. So any infrastructure asset, if you pull it together, it comes into a vehicle called an InvIT. Any commercial real estate, you pull it together and you put it in a vehicle, it comes under REITs. That's as simple as it is. Okay. We'll go to InvITs first. So InvITs are basically trusts which are registered with SEBI, and they can hold operational infrastructure projects. Okay. So what is extremely important to understand is SEBI has clearly defined what REITs and InvITs can hold. They will hold operational assets. So this is not a vehicle where, somebody is raising money to construct a new highway or a new infrastructure asset. The asset is already in place. It is operational, and bulk of the money raised needs to go into an operational asset. Okay. So today, if I am an infrastructure company, for example, I am a road company. Let me say I'm NHAI. Now I have got a lot of highways across the country. Okay. I have put in a lot of capital to construct these highways. Now, if I want to monetize this asset of mine, what I can do is I can pool certain highways into what is called an InvIT, into a trust. So I can say, okay, I'll take 10 highways across the country, pool it into a trust, which is called an InvIT, and issue units of this InvIT to the public. Okay, when I issue units of this InvIT to the public, the money that I raise, it's as good as saying I am selling these assets to the trust, and the units of this trust are now owned by the public. By public, I mean individual investors, HNIs, as well as institutional investors and FIIs. So I'm just using public in a broad sense, but basically I am monetizing the asset. As a result, the money that I get helps me to construct further highways. So this is actually an extremely powerful way for infrastructure companies to monetize the assets they've already created, raise capital, and deploy that capital into further construction activity. Okay. Once registered, InvITs can raise funds from public or private placement routes. Okay, so you can have a public issue like an IPO, or you can raise the money through private placement, which means you approach only certain FIIs or institutional investors and raise the money from them. Okay, as of now, we've seen that there are 3 listed InvITs in India. You have the IRB InvIT, which is a portfolio of road assets. It's a portfolio of highways. You have IndiGrid and PowerGrid InvIT, which basically comprise of power transmission assets. Now, basically what IndiGrid and PowerGrid do is they have power transmission lines across the country. Their business is to build power transmission lines. And what is the role of a power transmission line? It is basically to transmit the power from the source where the power is generated to the source where the power is utilized. So from the point of generation of power, you will transmit the power to, say, the industrial areas or residential areas where the power is consumed. And because you've set up those power transmission lines and you are providing this, this activity of transmitting the power, you basically enter into long-term power purchase agreements with the vendors, and you have a certain defined cash flow. Now, these are long-term contracts that you get into. So you have a certain defined cash flow, and the cash flow that is received by the power transmission lines goes to the InvIT and in turn to the unit holders of the InvIT. Okay. The InvITs basically can provide, the cash flow or the payout to the investors either in the form of fixed income or equity. So what is very important to understand is REITs and InvITs are actually a hybrid asset class. You cannot classify them as either equity or debt. They have some component of debt and some component of equity. The units of IRB, IndiGrid, PowerGrid are listed on the exchange. You can buy it just like you buy any share in the market. You can go on the exchange and purchase even 1 unit of the InvIT. For InvITs which are privately placed, the minimum ticket size is 2 crore rupees. So these are not, freely tradable on the exchange. The liquidity is lower as compared to publicly listed InvITs, and the ticket size is in multiples of 2 crores. So if you want to buy 1 unit of an NHAI InvIT, you'll have to buy a minimum of 2 crores or 4 crores or 6 crores, and in those multiples. Similarly, when you go to sell, so InvITs which come through a private placement route, the liquidity will be lower and the ticket size will be much higher. This is typically the structure of an InvIT, wherein if you look at the bottom of the pyramid, you have various infrastructure assets. Each asset is, an SPV set up for each asset. So if you see at the bottom of the slide, you've got 3 assets. You have SPV 1, 2, 3. Okay, so each asset goes into a single SPV. Now, these assets are owned by the InvIT, okay, which is basically the trust. So the manufacturer of these assets sells these assets to the InvIT. The InvIT in turn, sells units to the investors, okay, and gets money from them. So this money obviously goes to the, the manufacturer of these assets, and that's how the manufacturer will monetize these assets, okay. And the investors own units in the InvITs. Since these are operational assets and they receive a regular cash flow, okay, they will make a quarterly payout to the InvIT, and the InvIT is nothing but a pass-through vehicle. So every quarter, the InvIT will, distribute the cash flow to the investors. As per the SEBI regulations, minimum 90% of the cash flows that come to the InvIT, okay, have to be distributed to the investors. So whatever cash flow is being generated by these SPVs, minus whatever expenses they may have, 90% of those cash flows need to be paid out. And all the REITs and InvITs today make a quarterly payout to investors. Okay, you hold units in the InvIT, the units themselves are listed on the exchange, and the price of the units changes just like the price of, an equity share. So you might buy an InvIT at a certain price. Okay, once you buy the unit of the InvIT, you will start receiving a regular quarterly cash flow from the company, which is, a kind of a cash inflow for you. But the price of the underlying unit can also change. So you might buy the unit of an InvIT at 100 rupees. You start getting a quarterly distribution on that, which is your cash flow. And over a period of time, the price of the InvIT may also appreciate to 105, 110, which is an additional capital gain for you. So that is typically the structure of an InvIT. This slide basically illustrates what I had spoken about, that the unit holders of the InvIT basically invest into the InvIT, and the InvIT basically invests into the various SPVs. The SPVs distribute cash flows to the InvIT in the form of dividend or interest or return of capital, which in turn is passed on to the unit holders. Now, if the InvIT or if some of these SPVs by the manufacturer was set up by taking debt, okay, then when the manufacturer sells these units or sells these SPVs to the InvIT, what they basically do is they transfer the debt to the InvIT. And when you transfer debt to the InvIT, each of these SPVs needs to repay debt. And when you are repaying debt, you're paying interest on the debt, plus you're repaying a portion of the principal, which is where the term return of capital comes in. So any InvIT which has, debt at the SPV level will have a component of interest and return of capital. Whatever is the equity portion is the portion on which dividend is paid out. So the cash flow which comes to the InvIT and in turn to the unit holder can be a combination of dividend, interest, and return of capital. If you look at, again, I've discussed this publicly offered listed InvITs. Basically, when they come out with the IPOs, the units offered to the public, you have to make an application of minimum 20 investors, and the minimum investment and trading lot in the IPO is 1 lakh. This has now recently been revised by SEBI, where you can buy or sell even 1 unit on the exchange after listing. Privately placed InvITs, okay, is available only to institutional investors, and the minimum investment is 1 crore to 25 crores at the time of the private placement, and trading lots are in the range of 1 to 2 crores. If you see what are the publicly listed InvITs in India as of today, you have IRB InvIT, IndiGrid and PowerGrid, as we mentioned. You've had InvITs which have come through the private placement route, which is InfraVit Trust. You have Oriental Infra Trust. You have India Infrastructure Trust, Tower Infrastructure Trust. And if you see what is the kind of assets that they have, it's quite diversified. You have power transmission lines in IndiGrid PowerGrid. You've got highways in Oriental Infra Trust. You've got gas transmission in India Infrastructure Trust. So today, if you want to, own a portfolio of gas transmission lines, it's possible in the country. If you want to own a portfolio of telecom towers, it is possible. Okay. If you want to own a portfolio of highways, it's possible. So that is basically the role of InvITs, where you can really diversify your portfolio, your overall investment portfolio, and take, allocation to certain infrastructure assets, which will make a regular payout to you. A lot of institutional investors are attracted by InvITs and even HNIs because of the fact that I mentioned that you get a quarterly payout or a cash flow distribution from these InvITs and REITs. So today, when you invest into a direct bond, most of the bonds pay you an interest once a year. Okay, the REITs and InvITs make a quarterly payout to you. So for someone who wants a regular cash flow, this becomes an extremely attractive means of investment. Also, what happens is that, as I said, 90% of these cash flows need to be paid out on a quarterly basis, which is why you are assured that a certain amount will definitely be paid to you every quarter. Benefits of InvITs, as we've discussed, they provide long-term financing option for existing infrastructure projects. They free up the developer capital for reinvestment into new projects. These are typically low-risk investments, okay, offered to attract long-term investors such as insurance and pension funds. But we've seen a lot of HNIs also getting into this recently. Again, just to give you a sense, the post-tax, if I'm assuming a 30% tax, a 30% tax rate, the current yield on an IndiGrid or a PowerGrid InvIT today is about 6.5% to 7%, and this is on a post-tax basis of 30%. So if you compare this today to any of the bonds or even to debt mutual funds in the market, you will see that the rate is extremely attractive, even at current market prices. And that is why you've seen a lot of interest from HNIs as well as institutional investors to invest into this asset class. It brings high standards of governance, since now these units are publicly owned, and they deliver a predictable distribution plus a growth potential for the investors in the underlying price of the InvIT units. How does the taxation work for InvITs? Like we've seen, the payouts could be in three portions. Interest income is taxed at marginal rate. Return of principal is tax-free because that is a return of capital, so there's no tax on that. And when it comes to dividend, okay, in case of dividend, there is a provision in the budget, okay, which says that, I know that what happened in the last some time back was that the government said that any dividend income that you get now from owning equities will be taxed as per your tax slab. But there is an exception which has been made for REITs and InvITs. The exception is that if the REIT or the InvIT has opted for the old tax regime, then if it pays out any dividend to the investors, the dividend is tax-free for the investors. And if the REIT or the InvIT opts for the new tax regime, which is, they decide that they will pay tax at the rate of 25%, then the dividend is taxed in the hands of investors, just like your normal income. So at the marginal rate of tax. So it also depends on, when you're looking at a REIT or InvIT, as to what is the structuring of that REIT or InvIT. Okay. Sale of units on the exchange. Now, how is capital gains defined for REITs and InvITs? So long-term capital gains are taxed at 10% and short-term capital gains are taxed at 15%, which is similar to your equity taxation. The difference is what is long-term and what is short-term. So for REITs and InvITs, short-term is less than 3 years and long-term is more than 3 years. Okay, so the time horizon is 3 years. If you sell the units in less than 3 years, you will pay 15% short-term capital gains. If you sell it after 3 years, you will pay 10% long-term capital gains. There was an article in the paper a few days back which mentioned that the finance ministry is considering to rationalize this part in the upcoming budget. They may make long-term definition as 1 year for REITs and InvITs in the upcoming budget. But again, it was just an article in the paper. We'll have to wait and see if that happens. REITs, like I mentioned, is basically a portfolio of commercial real assets. Okay, so it is very similar to InvITs, but it is a portfolio of commercial real assets. Again, SEBI has ensured that the assets in the REITs portfolio should be operational, and they should be assets which are, if they are operational, they are also leased out. So you have a commercial building where you have different tenants. The tenants pay a certain monthly rental to the the owner of the asset, which is the REIT, and the REIT in turn will pay that out to the investors on a quarterly basis. Okay, you have 3 public REITs which are listed in India as of today. One is the Embassy Office Parks REIT, which is by Embassy Group. You have the Mindspace Business Park REIT, which is by the Mindspace Group, and you have the Brookfield India REIT. Units can be bought on the exchange just like you buy units, just like you buy shares. The structure is very similar to InvITs. So each commercial real estate goes into a particular, one SPV set up for one commercial real estate property. All these SPVs are held under the REIT. The units are issued to the, the unit holders who, pay a certain amount for the units. And that basically acts as a way of monetization for the real estate developer. The benefits of REITs, basically, all the REITs which have come into the market basically comprise of grade A commercial properties. So they are extremely high quality, commercial properties which are leased out. You have excellent tenants who occupy these assets, and you have long-term lease agreements. So this is something which assures you that you have a high quality portfolio of commercial real estate and a high quality of tenants. So today, if you want to invest into a commercial property directly, you need to probably shell out 15 to 25 to 50 crores of rupees to buy a particular building, and then you have the hassle of putting it out on rent, etc. Right? But if you buy a unit of a REIT, you straight away get exposure to a portfolio of commercial assets. So you'll probably get exposure to 8 to 10 commercial properties by owning one unit of a REIT, and properties which are ready, which are grade A, which are leased out, and which provide a regular cash flow. So this is again an excellent way to diversify the real estate portion of the overall portfolio and to get regular cash flows out of it. Units are listed on the exchange. It's extremely easy to buy. Just to give you an example, the Embassy Office Park REIT, some of the assets in that portfolio include the Express Towers building at Nariman Point. It includes a couple of buildings in BKC. It includes the Manyata Tech Park in Bangalore, which is a prime property in Bangalore, which is occupied by some of the Fortune 500 companies in the world. So those are the kind of commercial assets that we are talking about, which are part of some of these REITs. And the kind of tenants who occupy these properties. Even during the last year, during the lockdown, when there were fears that people are working from home, what will happen to the rental collection for some of these assets? Okay, what we saw is for Embassy, they were able to collect 88% of the rental yields even during the period of lockdown, and today that number has gone back to above 90%. So they are able to collect bulk of the rent from their tenants, irrespective of the fact that there was a lockdown. Numbers for Mindspace and Brookfield are also similar. So despite the lockdown, you had high quality tenants who have continued to honor the lease commitments and make the rental payments. Taxation is very similar to InvITs, so I'll not run through this. It is exactly the same for REITs and InvITs. And again, the benefits of investing in REITs are liquidity, because the units are tradable on the exchange. You can buy and sell them like shares. Transparency, what is the what are the commercial properties which are part of the portfolio. The asset quality is something which you're aware of before you invest. There are regular distributions, and obviously it helps in diversification of the portfolio. So this is just a brief overview on REITs and InvITs, which we thought we will share with the group, and just make you aware of this asset class, given that it is something which has come up in the last couple of years, but it is seeing increasing traction amongst investors and a lot of demand for these kind of units. Happy to take any questions.
So far, no questions in Q&A box. If any member, any attendee wants to ask a question, they may raise their hands. We'll unmute them for asking a question. Yashish, over to you.
Thank you, Vishal bhai and Abhinav ji. Just a minute. Actually, I will have to. Yes, sir. Thanks, Vishal ji and Abhinav ji. And thanks for that extra lecture also on asset classification. Yeah, we enjoyed, and I think everybody must have been enjoyed it, that they are again in the FM lecture. Yeah. I would request Shreyans, our core team member, to give a vote of thanks, proposed vote of thanks for on behalf of BCSE and WIRC.
Thank you, Ashish bhai. So, dear members, there is a famous quote by Peter Lynch, which says, in the long run, it's not just how much money you make that will determine your future prosperity. It's how much of that money you put to work by saving it and investing it. And dear members, mutual fund investments forms one of the important asset class towards achieving prosperity. Today, both our speakers, Vishal Chandriramani and Abhinay Gupta, have explained various nitty-gritties of mutual fund investments wonderfully. Sir, you have explained different types and categories of mutual funds with selection criteria and monitoring process in a very lucid manner with the help of charts, graphs, pictograms, and illustrations. Additionally, your insights into REIT and in NVIT is very helpful and helped us for better understanding of these instruments. On behalf of entire BCSE family, I take this opportunity to propose a well-deserved vote of thanks to both the speakers. We express our gratitude for joining us and enlightening us on this topic. With this, I would request Yashish sir to take this session ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Yashish bhai, and thank you, Lalit bhai.
Thank you so much, Vishal bhai.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abhinay.
Thank you so
It
much.
was a
Lalit.
pleasure having you.
Same here.
here
It was an
again.
absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you, everyone.
We'll end the session.
Yes.